All righty, we're live. It's another Penguins Live chat here on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now platforms. I am Dan Kingerski, joined already. We're going strong out of the gate. Let's get this out of here. That is Coach Francis Anzalone. Let me say your name properly for once. Back from the World Championships, settling back into hockey school mode and coaching some of the future NHLers. We're going to talk some Penguins coaches today. We're going to break down, we're going to handicap them, the positives, the negatives, the pros and the cons of the five primary candidates we've identified thus far for the Penguins job. Francis, I get to go in November, but how was Sweden?
I was in Sweden and Finland. It's great. Second year in a row, third year in a row, actually. It's a beautiful part of the world, and the World Championships wasn't my primary reason for being over there. I did get to go to a few games, and I knew this already from my time working with the Latvian national team, but it's a very, very special event, Dan, because it brings the whole globe together. And it's incredible to see the fans from all the countries get behind it. I am a little bit biased, but the Latvian fans are among the most best, passionate in the entire world. I got to go to the Latvia-Canada game, and 13,000 seats in the Avicii Arena in Stockholm. There were probably 9,000 or 10,000 at the game. Latvia was 7,000 or 8,000 of the people in attendance. Easily.
I was going to say, who's left in Latvia if 8,000 people are there?
It's amazing, and people come for the whole event. They work however many days out of the year, save their money to be able to go to the World Championships. I mean, you're watching Canada and Latvia, and Dan, there's probably like 40 Canadian fans at the game. And that's different for us, right? Because we're used to seeing Americans and Canadians dominating buildings. But over there, it's the European show, and Team USA and Team Canada, we're always the road team.
You know, I thing I love about Latvian fans, World Juniors and World Championships, there's just a fan culture that promotes a certain joyous enthusiasm.
Yep.
Fun chants, and they're into the game. It could be 6-0. They're losing. They're getting shellacked, and they're like, "Hell with it! Let's have some fun." And I always am envious of fan bases who can kind of turn that knob. Winnipeg is, very, very similar. Like the Manitoba hockey fans have that going for them as well. But hey, listen, I'm glad to have you on board today. I'm thinking back to a few weeks ago, actually, I guess about a month ago now. Mm-hmm. Not quite a month, but pretty close. When you and I started tossing out our early favorites for the Penguins job.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, we nailed it. I'm just going to say, I don't know that there's anybody on our primary list that we didn't see coming. I think you and I had like 8 names or so, and of the 5 we're talking about today, 5 of those were part of the 8 a month ago.
Yeah. I was going to say, when you throw out 13 or 14 names like I did and probably confuse everyone, they forget after a while. We did cast a pretty wide net, but we casted a pretty wide net because we think Kyle Dubas casted a pretty wide net. And I will say that if I was a betting man, Dan, I would not bet on who the next Penguins head coach is going to be. I would take my money elsewhere.
Oh, really?
This is a tough one to call for me, but I do think that the Penguins head coach, the next head coach, is going to be one of the 5 that we have identified that we're going to talk about here today. I have a hard time picking which one it will be, but I do believe that the 5 that, to your credit, you've narrowed it down to are 5 good names, and it's going to be one of these 5. If we have some time, maybe we can discuss a B list or a secondary list, but I think these 5 are certainly in the ballpark.
Well, just based on Kyle Dubas's comments from the World Championships, I think it was my colleague Josh Yohe, who was over there in Sweden. I think Josh had the quote from Kyle that there's still a couple of people they want to talk to, because of the AHL season and its schedule, and the NHL, the Stanley Cup playoffs. So that, to me, I'm thinking, okay, Elaine Nasreddine and Todd Nelson.
Yep, exactly.
And Nasruddin is one of the 5 on our list. So without you and I yapping any further, all right, let's start our pros and cons list and breaking this down. Here's Nasruddin. Now, you made these graphics. I did not. I think you're tired of my haphazard scatter shot, throw it on the wall and see if you can pull it off in live real time approach. So you made these graphics for me. Alain Nasruddin, give me your handicap on his candidacy.
Yeah, and what I like about the graphics is it obviously keeps us organized. It's also a great opportunity for the audience to chime in as we go through these bullet points. I think that Alain Nasruddin is going to be a very, very strong candidate. I think there's a lot of reasons to like him. I will touch on some of these bullets. The bullet points and the text in white are some of the reasons why. And the bullet points in gold/yellow are maybe the reasons why not. I think there are 4 more reasons why with Alain Nasruddin. He's been a journeyman. He had to come up the hard way, not only as a youth player and a young player from a non-traditional background, but he had to come up the hard way as a player through the minor leagues, through the Penguins organization, and he's had to earn his stripes as a coach. My favorite aspect of Alain Nasruddin, Dan, is the 3rd bullet point. I just think he's been mentored by 2 of the best teacher coaches in the game, in John Hines and also Peter DeBoer. Peter DeBoer right now is one of the top 3 to 5 coaches in the game. My fingers are crossed for him that he has a chance to perhaps meet his good friend Paul Maurice in the Stanley Cup Finals this year. There's a lot to like about Alain Nasruddin. I like his story. I like his journey. I like his presence. He has a bit of the something to prove factor. There is a tie to the Penguins organization. There is, I use the term, light familiarity with the core players on the team. Now, that can be both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on how the relationship was. My gut tells me the relationship from the playing days and the early coaching days, probably more of a non-factor than a factor, but it's worth being on the list nonetheless. And he has coached, whether as an interim head coach or an NHL assistant coach, star players. Mm-hmm. And there is still a core 3 in Pittsburgh. And I think his experience with core players at the NHL level, albeit as an interim head coach or as an assistant, bodes well for him here as a Penguins coaching candidate.
Well, that's going to be a very interesting thing. You say core 3. In reality, there's probably 5. Mm-hmm. And 3 of the 5 quite easy to coach and to deal with. You kind of let Evgeny Malkin go. You keep him in the guardrails. As long as he stays within, in the lines, he's fine. Sidney Crosby and Brian Rust are just going to drive it down straight. Those guys are whiskey drinkers. They're going to take your, some punishment. They're going to deliver for you, and they're going to work hard every single day. The 4th one, or I guess rather the 5th one, is Erik Karlsson.
Yeah.
And if Kyle Dubas is unable to facilitate a trade to a winner, we'll put the positive spin on it, then you're stuck with him next year in a bad situation that he probably doesn't want to be in. You saw how disinterested or disengaged he became in the final 20, 25 games this season. A coach being able to keep him engaged and not let, an apple spoil and then spoil the rest of the bunch could be, quite the challenge. And I like Nasruddin's chin, so to speak. I think he's, kind of a hard-nosed, over-the-puck player. And thus, I would expect him to be the same sort of coach. Kind of in the Rod Brindamore sort of way. They knew one way to play the game, and that was with everything. Put your body between the puck and the net, take the hit, give the hit, take the bruises, and show up every day with a lunch pail. I like that mentality for the Penguins. Obviously, I think you're right. The downside, if you haven't been a head coach a lot, what are the X's and O's like? Can you grab the marker from the assistant coach and improve upon what's being done? And can you set forth a better game plan for the team? I think that's maybe the interesting part about him.
Yeah, I actually think that aspect of it gets a bit overrated. I think it's the communicating with the players. It's the maximization of the individuals and the collective. It's the presence piece that really comes into play for the head coach. It's interesting. I want to share this right out of the gate here today because it's a good seed to plant as we go through these 5. I was listening to a podcast while I was overseas. I was actually walking along the Baltic Sea, not to make anyone jealous. It's quite the sight in 40-degree weather with my hoodie up. I was listening to a podcast. It was an interview Jim Rutherford gave with an author named Stephen Brunt, relatively recent. And he talked about his time in Pittsburgh. He actually talked a lot about his time in Pittsburgh, very candidly, I might add, which Jim Rutherford is. It's one of the reasons why I think he was a good interview for folks like you, and I enjoy listening to him speak. There's very little filter. And he talked about when he hired Mike Johnston. And he was very, very quick to say the respect he had for Mike Johnston then and now, but, and I'm paraphrasing, there's something to coaching star players like Sidney Crosby. And he didn't expand upon it too much, but
I think that's fairly obvious what he's saying.
Mike Sullivan had a commanding of the respect of the Sidney Crosbys of the world. I think it will be important for Kyle Dubas to still bring in someone that can win over that core group of 3, 4, and 5. So that's going to be a key question we need to ask ourselves as we go through these 5.
Yeah.
In their bio, in their resume, is there any indication that they're going to be able to help transition the organization, because it's clearly a transition period, maximize the young players, but still reach the core guys? Because we need the core guys to make this next turn.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I've written that a couple of times. I think that's Nasruddin's biggest selling point to me is that commanding presence. I've been very impressed. I watched some Dallas Stars playoff games just for the Nasruddin effect. Later in that first round series against Colorado, which really could have been a Stanley Cup final for all intents and purposes. There he is hanging over the boards, marker and whiteboard, diagramming and barking at players, and had everyone's rapt attention.
Yeah.
And they were in it with him, and he was in it with them. I'm like, all right, that guy can do it. He can, in these pressure situations, command these guys. I'm not going to bring up names. I don't want to, impugn anybody. But I have seen assistant coaches hop over the boards, start drawing things, and guys are checking out the rocket in the third row. Yeah. Or the rocket over Pete DeBoer's shoulder. Yeah.
There usually is one. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep,
so
in Dallas.
I wonder why. But so that was, I think, a selling point to Nasruddin. Let's maybe flip the page here.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe very opposite of Elaine Nasruddin is Mitch Love.
Yeah.
They're kind of on two ends of the spectrum. And I can see Brandon Rickner here commenting, I'm 100% sold on Mitch Love. I'll be disappointed if it's not him.
Yeah.
And I kind of hate to tell Brandon, it's maybe a 25 to 30% chance that it's Mitch Love, which means a 60 to 70% chance, 75 rather, that it's not him. So let's go through the pros of Mitch Love. You've been talking about the Spencer Carberry tree growing now for a month. What kind of buzz he's got in hockey with the Capitals turnaround. And here's Mitch Love closely tied to it. And it doesn't hurt that the guy has been hugely successful at each stop as a head coach. And so much so that he didn't last more than 2 years at each stop. He didn't hop around. He kept getting promoted. So dive into Mitch Love here. What do you think?
Well, he has an interesting resume. He came up as a minor leaguer, played at a few different levels, got right to work as an assistant coach with the Everett Silvertips in the WHL, worked under former Penguins head coach Kevin Constantine, who, whether you love Kevin or hate him, and he's fallen on some rough times in the past, the man does know hockey. He is a hockey guy through and through. He is a defensive specialist. So for Mitch Love to get his first coaching job working under Kevin's direction, that is a great upbringing. You learn what to do. You also learn what not to do. It's a tremendous experience in so many ways. He was promoted to be the head coach in Everett. Great program, great place for a coach to cut his teeth. Then went to the American League, did a really good job with the Calgary Wranglers, has had a chance to be an NHL assistant coach in some good spots. You know, I use the acronym FOTY. Right, wrong, or indifferent, Spencer Carberry is the flavor of the year in the National Hockey League. And I just think that
I wondered what the hell that meant.
Kyle Dubas, I think, is intrigued with getting his ice cream out of that cooler. That's just the sense I get. If GMs could hire any coach from any team, I just think Spencer Carberry would be on a lot of people's lists. And I think Kyle and the Penguins would be right there. I've watched Mitch Love give some presentations in the past, Dan. He has a very good demeanor and delivery. Not too low by any means, not too high. He just speaks the information. I think that the older players in Pittsburgh would really gravitate towards that.
Interesting.
I can't say I know this guy like a book by any means, but I don't think there'll be a whole lot of rah-rah from Mitch Love. I think he's a really good pro guy. He delivers the information. He sounds like a guy who's on point. Now, very similar to Nasruddin, stylistically, the player that he was, he fills a lot of the Penguins' gaps. Like, this is a guy who could potentially speak from experience and work with the defensemen on being harder to play against, working with the forwards on playing all 200 feet, which the Penguins will need to do as much as any team in the National Hockey League next year to have a chance of playing meaningful games down the stretch. And the last thing I would share on Love is, if you look at his track record, Everett, Calgary in the American League, his teams have historically been among the lowest at goals against. And that's going to be really, really key for the Penguins moving forward. There's a lot to like about this guy. And I too heard from sources that he had an impressive virtual gathering with Kyle Dubas. I think he will minimally be a finalist.
Fair enough. I think maybe it's important for you and I to get into the negatives then on Mitch Love, just because he is, putting him at 25 to 30%, I think probably puts him, as a favorite, one of the 2 or 3 favorites for the job. So you put adaption by Dubas.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because, look, the Penguins roster, their roster construction, their lineup, I thought at the end of the year, they were somehow winning games, and I quite frankly have no idea how, because there were some parts of the lineup that were just so underwhelming and playing so poorly, and they still were able to win games. As Mike Sullivan maybe looked at me one day with a little smirk and a scowl simultaneously. It's like, well, our goaltending's pretty good right now. So they had that. I would imagine that you hire a guy like Mitch Love, you have to go get some players who fit a Mitch Love.
Yeah, and I think that this whole Penguins situation has forced Kyle Dubas a bit as a hockey guy to adapt. I think if he hires a Nasruddin, if he hires a Love versus a Woodcroft, who we're going to get to in a second, a Jeremy Colleton, who's Sheldon Keefe's assistant in New Jersey at present. They're different stylistically. They're different. Listen, Dan, every coach and manager values competitiveness. Every coach and manager values hardness.
Like, I want some guys who just take a few days off, keep the room relaxed. No one's ever going to say that.
Right, but like to put it in simple terms, like I can't see Kyle Dubas and Kevin Constantine having coffee together at a Starbucks. I see Kyle going to sit at a different table, okay? Mitch Love came up around that type of a coach. I think he's got a DNA about him as a coach, But, listen, Sheldon Keefe, who Kyle Dubas was very close with, he came up the hard way too. So I just think this whole situation at large is forcing Dubas and Spezza to really look at, okay, we have to shape it in our image. We have to shape it towards our vision. But what also fits Pittsburgh? What also fits the National Hockey League of 2025? I think I think it's really important that you build a team to the identity of a city, no matter where you are. I've coached in South Dakota. I've coached in Louisiana. You got to try to shape the team to the image of the city. I think that is a very real thing.
I forgot about Louisiana. Big hockey culture in Louisiana. The Mud Bugs? No, not the.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, it was the Mud Bugs.
Yeah, in a building built in 1952, where one thump on the glass sends shock waves to the entire city. A finesse skilled team doesn't necessarily fly there. Everybody loves winning, but you've got to build the team to the image of your fan base. I think that is still a real thing.
Experience on this. You and I have been through Johnstown, and I saw some people checking in from Johnstown when we first started the chat. You and I were there when Tampa Bay bought the Chiefs or co-owned the Chiefs.
Yeah.
And they took fighting kind of off the table. I mean, they didn't prohibit it, but there's only really one guy who was equipped to do that. And the fans went ballistic. And there was no congruity between the team and the city. And for that reason, I thought maybe, your father was the coach, didn't get a fair shake in some matters and so on and so forth. Had Tampa Bay understood Johnstown, they would have had maybe 3 skill lines and 3 guys who were never going to play hockey beyond the ECHL ever again, and said, okay, guys, you go entertain the fans. All right, you 9, put the puck in the net. But I digress. Let's get to Jay Woodcroft. Let me remove Mitch Love. There's Jay Woodcroft.
Yeah.
This guy obviously coaches Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't get over the hump with the Oilers, despite some pretty good hockey by Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Gets bounced in the second round by the Golden Knights a couple of years ago. His career, I thought, really took a hit. So did the Oilers. They really just came out sort of heartless in the following season and never got it going until I'm drawing a blank. The coach of the Oilers now until
Chris Knobloch. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm looking at the big willowy Chris Knobloch, and I can't think of his name. Thank you. Replaces Jay Woodcroft. So Woodcroft knows how to deal with star players. He knows maybe some mistakes he made with the, great players, but also mistakes he made in constructing his lineups and that sort of thing. So walk me through Jay Woodcroft 2.0.
Okay. As an aside, I do think that coaches sometimes get let go because of who's available. I don't think that that's entirely the reason why coaches get let go, but I think it's a factor. For example, Drew Bannister gets let go in St. Louis, has much to do in part with Jim Montgomery being on the market and Doug Armstrong really wanting Jim Montgomery. I think Joel Quenneville being available had a lot to do with Greg Cronin getting dismissed in Anaheim. Had they replaced Greg Cronin with anyone other than Joel Quenneville, I would have been disappointed. And I'm not suggesting there was any form of tampering going on. I'm just talking out loud here. I think that a lot of the decisions made by the Philadelphia Flyers over the last 2 to 3 months had to do with assuming Rick Tocchet would be available and would want to come home to Philly. So where am I going with this? Edmonton did have a rough start last year or the year before last, depending on what you view last year as 23, 24. I get my years mixed up sometimes.
They all run together. Trust me, you get older, they get even blurrier.
But I think a big reason Jay Woodcroft got let go is because Jeff Jackson had come on board as the president of hockey operations. Jeff Jackson was Connor McDavid's agent. Jeff Jackson had an affinity for Chris Knobloch. Jeff Jackson knew he could probably get his hands on Chris Knobloch. So there's always more in play here, just as an aside.
All right.
Okay, Jay Woodcroft, like how he's come up. Video coach at Michigan State University back in the day, probably made $1. Video coach in Detroit for the Red Wings. Todd McClellan takes him to San Jose to be a true assistant coach. The rest is history. He does have experience with star players. You learn a lot from coaching the Dreisaitl's, the Nugent Hopkins, the McDavids, the Nurses, and the Hymans of the world. He has spent the last year really educating himself, not only on hockey, but on leadership, on communication. I've listened to 2 or 3 interviews that Jay Woodcroft has done where he's talked about his time away. He's gone overseas to Europe to study the game. He's probably as ready as anyone would be to come back and have his next stop be better than his last. He's a student of the game. He listens 2 times more than he speaks, which is a good quality. He has a background in teaching and development. He did a wonderful job in Bakersfield, coaching a lot of the young players that are now in Edmonton or were in Edmonton. So he'll do a nice job with the young players coming up. I feel like, Dan, he would be a good fit for Kyle Dubas. Like, I could see them sitting across from each other, having really deep intellectual discussions. And the STP factor, there's the something to prove factor. You know, you don't like the way it went down in Edmonton. You can say what you want on camera. It pisses you off when you leave like that and the next guy does better. You got a little chip on your shoulder. So I'm sure there's a something to prove factor with Woodcroft as well. Now, there are some reasons why I don't think it's a fit. We can get to that in a second. But
well, I was going to say, I'm interested to hear, you know, you talk him up pretty well. I like the student of the game. I like somebody who goes on the retreat through the Himalayas to, you know, tap into the hockey gods and the ethereal, so on and so forth. So talk to me about why you don't think he would be the right guy.
Reminds me a bit of Mike Johnston.
Oh, okay. Well, you can almost stop right there.
Hold on, though. I used to write Mike Johnston handwritten notes when I coached junior hockey. I have a ton of respect for Mike Johnston. Mike Johnston was the gold standard for young coaches coming up in junior hockey. It didn't work, Mike Johnston in this core. Jim Rutherford talks about it on this podcast. We could drop a link out for anybody that wants to go back who's a nerd like me. I can't see Woodcroft in the core. It doesn't mesh with me great. I have a blockage in my mind.
Too intellectual, too
presence thing.
Okay.
Sid is still the type of guy that responds to, like, we hear the coach. The coach walks in. The coach has a commanding presence. Now, Sid will probably want to talk that coach's ear off at times on things he sees when it's time for the coach and the leader to converse. But I still think Sid is from that old school, like Nathan McKinnon, his best friend, plays for Jared Bednar. There's a presence there. I want to be very clear. If Woodcroft gets hired as the head coach of the Penguins, I'll be jacked to go to training camp and watch him work. When I close my eyes, there's a blockage there. I see others ahead of Woodcroft getting this job for that reason.
No, it's funny you say he listens twice as much as he speaks. I think you know from firsthand experience, and I know from being around, that was not the case for the last 8 years of Mike Sullivan's tenure with the Penguins. Maybe at first when he had Rick Talk as an assistant coach, I know Talk got his say in the coach's room. But after that, there was nobody until David Quinn, really, who was able to push Mike Sullivan in one direction or another. It really was Mike Sullivan's team and Mike Sullivan speaking almost to the exclusive. So that would be, I think, might be some culture shock inside if that happened.
And a real key with coaching today, I think, is you have to open your ears to the players' feedback. It has to be a partnership, all those buzz terms. but they have to know that at the end of the day, you're going to make the decision. And there does come a point in time in the dialogue with the players where you have to say as a coach, that's enough. And I think Mike Sullivan was very good at that. Trust, honesty, but there comes a point in time where I appreciate your perspective. I'm going to make the decision now. And I could see that with some other candidates ahead of Woodcroft. I'm trying to be very careful here because I don't want to mislead you or the audience that I know Woodcroft that great. I'm just a student of the game, and these are the things I see when I study Woodcroft. Okay. And then the other piece is just the goals against and some of the struggles in Edmonton towards the end. Dubas will need to grill him on that.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, Edmonton, they especially against Vegas, lost the defensive side of the puck. They would score a goal, and they looked very much like the Penguins of the last couple or a few years when Vegas was able to score upon them within the next 90 seconds, I think 3 or 4 times in that 6-game series. Yeah. It was something ridiculous. Now, in fairness, Jonathan Marchessault was on a heater unlike he's ever been on in his life. He couldn't miss the net if he tried. By the same token, he was getting these chances, and William Karlsson was getting these chances after Edmonton scored and in these big moments. And it was a continuous problem. It wasn't just once or twice. You're right. They didn't fix it.
Yeah, okay. And I don't know, Dan, last thing on Woodcroft. And the audience may think that this shouldn't be a factor. That I don't see a stylistic fit with the city. Woodcroft.
See, now that surprises me because I thought Woodcroft is more of an offensive-minded guy, which is the DNA of Pittsburgh hockey.
He doesn't strike me. He doesn't strike me as the type of guy that, like Mike Johnston in Pittsburgh, not the world's greatest mesh. Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh, hardworking, textile mill town where he's from in New England. There was a good stylistic mesh there. Woodcroft is more of an intellectual processor.
Okay.
Definitely has, and I don't mean to take a shot at him, more of that assistant coach personality. There's no question about it. So I'm not sure on this one. I've got a little bit of a block in the brain. I wouldn't bet on him being the coach.
Let's go to my original number one choice. DJ Smith. Yeah. What really sold me on Smith, Francis, when I started doing my research, literally, I got home from the Kyle Dubas press conference. I wrote up the couple analysis articles, and I just began going over coaches over the last, 5 and so years who have been on rebuilding teams and looking at them sort of as a first run. What could I learn? What could I see? And I'm like, wow, DJ Smith, interesting. I remember how Pierre Dorion fought to keep him. There was a drumbeat to move him on probably a year before Dorion did, but the Ottawa Senators organization liked him so much, thought he was such a great fit. And when he was eventually let go, the compliments from Brady Tkachuk and a couple of the other star players, young star players at that time, a few years ago, were more than just your token lip service. It's our fault, not his. He was a good coach, blah, blah, blah. They were thanking him personally. And that struck a chord with me. But I also would imagine maybe that's not good for the Penguins core. So walk me through DJ Smith.
One of the, and I don't know DJ personally, but I know a lot of people who know him. I know one gentleman who knows him very, very well. One of the genuinely good guys in the game. Like, it's really hard to find somebody that would say something bad or negative about DJ Smith. There's familiarity with Kyle Dubas from the time in Toronto. I think that there's a comfortability factor. The second bullet point up on the screen, just, DJ Smith came up through the Canadian Hockey League as a coach. He's a Canadian guy. There's probably a lot of mutual connections. Dubas and DJ Smith. I think Jason Spezza is going to be a very, very big voice in whoever gets hired as the next Penguins coach. So I'd be curious what Spezza's experience was like with DJ Smith in Toronto. I believe Spezza was there when Smith was there. We know that Spezza did not have the greatest relationship towards the end, or so we've read, with Mike Babcock. But I'd be curious what Spezza's opinion is of DJ Smith, because I think Spezza's opinion is held in high regard by Kyle Dubas.
Well, let's push pause button on DJ Smith for a moment and talk about the coaching search at large, because we can maybe learn a little bit about what Spezza likes based on his hire in Wilkes-Barre Scranton, hiring Kirk McDonald.
Yeah.
And my first impression of meeting Kirk McDonald, compared to what he really is, and my subsequent impressions of him, were 180. I thought he was kind of an aw shucks sort of guy. And in reality, he's a level 9.5 intense guy who's not afraid to be banging on the glass, to get his team's attention during practice or during the game, rather. Really intense and passionate, needs 10 or 15 minutes to cool down after the game. He brings that emotion to things. And that was Spezza's hire. So I wonder if Spezza sort of likes that high motor sort of coach.
So this is where it gets interesting. DJ Smith was that way as a player. I think he's known as a coach as a very high energy, enthusiastic, spirited guy, which are the great qualities. DJ Smith is also known as a very fun-loving guy, at times a prankster and a practical jokester. When he joined Jim Hiller in LA, DJ Smith and Jim Hiller worked together in Toronto. When Hiller took over as the interim head coach for Todd McClellan, I read an article about DJ Smith's immediate impact on the spirit and the energy around the Los Angeles Kings. I think DJ Smith is a good hockey guy who's very well versed in knowing what a team needs. I just think he's got a good ticker for that, because he's been around the game and he's worked around a lot of high-level coaches. He also has perhaps a bit of a something to prove factor after it not ending the way that he wanted it to in Ottawa. Stylistically, I like this fit for the market. I think he's a well-rounded, well-versed hockey guy. I can see him at the podium every day addressing you all and being an interesting guy to talk to. I also see him at Permani's having a sandwich. I see him walking the streets in Pittsburgh. And I think when fans Google or YouTube him and they watch some clips of how he had to come up as a player, as like a 7th, 8th D, I think there'd be a lot of respect for DJ Smith. There's a lot to like here. He's in my top 3.
All righty. I think that's another important factor that maybe we take for granted. Some of the best baseball managers are the guys who didn't make the majors, or they're catchers, and you have to learn the game from different angles, and you have to take your lumps and your bruises while the star players get the glory. Yeah, Smith and Nasruddin certainly fall into that category, where they brought the lunch pail while the other guys, were served steaks.
Yep, 3 of the 4 coaches right now in the Stanley Cup playoffs were that way. Paul Maurice was that way as a junior player, had to retire at 21 years old because of an eye injury. Peter DeBoer was that way as a player, played a bit in the minor leagues, and then went to law school. Chris Knobloch was I think a stay-at-home defenseman that didn't play at a high level. Rod Brindamore was special, but Rod Brindamore comes from the old school. He was a hard player in the gym all the time. Most of the people know his story, but 3 of the 4 players, the coaches in the finals, not much of a playing background, to your point.
Yep. Well, here's a guy. We can wrap this up on the 5 coaches. Wait, that's DJ Smith. Let's turn the page to Jay Leach. I probably know the least about him.
Yeah.
although he's maybe got one of the bigger names. I think he's probably interviewed at every opening to this point. Obviously is not coming from a great Boston Bruins situation where they win the President's Trophy and get summarily dismissed, where they miss the playoffs, and things have been trending the wrong way in Boston. So guys guys that are on a train going the wrong direction don't usually jump up to a head coach, but it seems Leach is quite popular.
Yeah, I'd cut right to the chase here, and then we can work backwards. Like, if he is that good, I can't see the Bruins not hiring him. Now, the question would be, because again, he had been their minor league coach in Providence, and then he had left to be an NHL assistant, and then they brought him back.
Yeah.
Usually when that happens, it's to groom and ready the person.
But that's a difficult thing, though. You're the good cop one day. You're the guy disseminating the message and putting some sugar on it for the players. Then the next day, you're the guy in the back room sending somebody else out to deliver a message. That's a difficult transition for most.
The other argument would be, well, if he was that good, why didn't they make him the interim head coach instead of Joe Sacco a few months ago? Well,
right.
Perhaps they were trying to almost protect him from whether it's the media or the inevitability of that second half. Nonetheless, Dan, I like this guy. If you research him, he has come up in some solid hockey cultures. He's played for some really good, I'll use the term, programs, including the Devils back in the day, where he was mostly, I think, a minor leaguer. He was around the Bruins, Bruce Cassidy, maybe even Claude Julien. He was at training camp with Bergeron, Crosby's good friend, Brad Marchand. He's been around some really good environments. He has experience with Crosby-like players. He walks into a room. He does have some presence, very articulate. He's known as connecting with his players, and he's very, very knowledgeable when it comes to play without the puck. What I struggle with here, Dan, is I can't see him like being named the head coach of the Penguins, but not the head coach of the Bruins.
I think you're right about that. There's just a little something weird about his candidacy because the Bruins had him, and they're sort of, I don't want to say passing, but the fact that they haven't named him the coach yet tells you they're looking around, and they've got the most familiarity with him. That probably docks him points from other situations as well. Other teams have I like this guy. Wait a minute. Why doesn't Boston want him?
Yep. And I don't know what they're going to do with their coaching hire. I've heard that it's a very wide net that they've cast. Much like there's a slight blockage for me with Woodcroft.
Yeah.
Similar with Leach for different reasons. If he gets an offer in his hand from the Penguins, not to oversimplify it, but I can't see the Bruins not matching it.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I don't know how you let that guy get away.
Fair enough. All right. Those are our 5. You and I got through it in about 40 minutes, give or take. We must have been short spoken today. That's a rarity for you and I.
Well, I do enjoy following this process. I love studying coaches. This is a really interesting. This is an interesting one. This one's hard to pick because you got that core 3 to 5. You got young players coming up. The cabinets aren't stocked with elite young players. You've got a general manager who's, I think, having to make a lot of adaptations. It's a really, really interesting dynamic here in Pittsburgh right now.
Well, I think one thing maybe you indirectly said or alluded to was Kyle Dubas likes the flavor of the years, so he wants to dip his ice cream from that freezer. There is something about Dubas, given his age and, who sees himself as a little bit of a disruptor or a new wave of hockey.
Yeah.
That's my perception. He might disagree, but the chance to do something different and be successful, I think, very much appeals to Kyle Dubas. So a guy like Mitch Love, who is a little bit different because he's younger and is maybe come up through the same way, but has a little bit of a different thinking, or even a guy like DJ Smith, who seems to be adaptable to different things, might appeal to Kyle Dubas more than your staid sort of Jay Leach or the other guys. And again, having said that, maybe that's why Jay Woodcroft would go to the top of the list, because Woodcroft is sort of the intellectual as well.
Yeah. When I look at Love, I put myself in Kyle Dubas' shoes. It's a call to Sheldon Keefe, who's a call to Spencer Carberry, who's worked with Mitch Love. Mitch Love, came up through the Canadian Hockey League. Kyle has a deep network there.
Yeah.
I think Kyle is close with a couple people in Calgary where Mitch Love had worked. Like I could see that one. There's no blocks in my brain. Mitch Love is the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like, there's a couple reasons why maybe not, like there are with any candidate, but I could see that one happening. To use your term, sort of disruptor, against the grain. That's the guy on this list that fits that for me. I want to see Nasreddine get another chance. I really do.
Yes.
I just like being around Peter DeBoer, Steve Spott, that Dallas Stars culture, having a coffee with Jim Nill every day. Like, I'd interview that guy just to get information out of him. But I think Mitch Love fits what you just said, probably the best out of any of those five. Yeah.
Even this last 45 minutes has maybe shaped my opinions a little bit more, which hopefully maybe wow. Good Lord, we have 400 people or 359 people watching us right now. It's maybe a record for me, except not counting trade deadline days when we can usually do 500 to 700 at a clip live. I would if it were me pending interviews, I probably would lean towards Nasreddine. But as I'm handicapping the Penguin situation and Kyle Dubas, I think I do put Mitch Love 1 and DJ Smith 2 and probably Nasreddine 3. Let's jump to some people on, some of the 350 watching us right now. Look at that from Johnstown checking in. Hey, is Scott's by Dam still open?
Down there, I believe so. I think it will always be open. That's a local spot there, if I'm not mistaken.
That was my favorite spot. Honest to God, if I went anywhere else in town, people kind of began to recognize me. So somebody would always come over and start that with that famous phrase, "Oh, hey, you're the play-by-play guy, right?" I'm like, yeah. You know what's wrong with the team? And I'm like, oh, God, I just want to eat my lunch and go back to work, please. And Scott of Scott's by Dam would always shoo them away from me. God bless him. I'd be curled up in the corner with all my game notes scattered around a booth, preparing for the game and whatnot with a giant taco. And somebody would come up, "Hey, you know what's wrong?" And Scott, like, "Hey, leave him alone. He's working." And I would just tip the heck out of that guy. I digress. I can't believe how long ago. That was what, 18 years ago or so?
Yeah, it's wild. And you know what? Like, I commend that place because they've really rallied around Tier 2 hockey with the NAHL there now. And a lot of people said that wouldn't work. And that has thrived there. I mean, I know that it will always be the Chiefs and the Jets and the minor pro days, but the North American Hockey League, which is a great league, by the way, has really thrived in Johnstown. And I'm very happy for the great hockey fans in Johnstown, because there are still a lot of them.
Oh, the Booster Club in Johnstown was second to none. Those people, what they were willing to do for their team was really
very loyal. Maybe not a large following, but very, very, very loyal, passionate.
They would go pick a player up and take them somewhere if they would. Oh yeah, hey, no problem. It was quite special. That regular dude. Afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
Can I get you a beer, Mr. Peterson? Or wait, no, what's I messed it up already. What's going on, Mr. Peterson? Let's talk about what's going in, Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, I'm curious too if folks think like, is it not going to be somebody on these 5? I mean, we could easily rattle.
I'm doing Norm Peterson jokes, and you're already back to coaching.
Yeah, I'm terrible. I'm not. I don't. I mean, I digress like on topic well, but I still kind of say somewhere on the rails. So that's never a skill set of mine.
I've got the entire map, and we're going to hit all 4 corners. Plus, you're not old enough to have really watched Cheers at all. Actually,
a little bit. Snippets here and there.
Cheers was just a weekly fun 30 minutes, and you laughed. It wasn't like Friends that just became 6 people. You just kept following because there was nothing else on TV. No, Cheers was.
I was a Friends guy through and through.
I know, but again, what was it on? 8 years? And the
Friends?
Yeah,
I think 10.
10? Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
Let's say the last 6 years, 5-6 years, there weren't any jokes. It's like the Big Bang Theory. They just stopped telling jokes, just became about the characters in a light situation.
I watched it religiously. Ashamed to it. The box set, the DVD box set is somewhere. I don't quite know where it is, but it's somewhere.
Well, now I know what to get you on Amazon for Christmas. All right. Steve says Nasruddin was a Terrian guy. I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing, Francis, to cut your teeth under Michel Therrien.
Yeah, played for Therrien, I think, and then Mike Yeo worked with Michel Therrien in Wilkes-Barre.
Yeah, and then Nasruddin coached under Yeo.
And then Nasruddin worked with John Hines. And like I said, I'm a big John Hines fan and a really big Pete DeBoer fan. And I think that's a draw right now for a lot of GMs and hockey people. You know, wow, like Nasruddin's worked with Pete DeBoer. That's great. That's great perspective.
I'm only putting this on the screen so you can see it. Cheers from Italy. You're the man, Dan, says Jay.
All right. Very good.
I'm on board for the mustache alone. Who has, is that Mitch Love has the mustache? Yeah, he's got a bit of a chop there, doesn't he?
Yeah, I don't know if he has it now. Well, he does. I think that's a relatively recent, that's a playoff photo, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because the beard's growing in. The beard was catching up to the mustache. From Christopher, will a new coach be thrown? The coach-killing roster anchors for useless players like Sully was. Wait, what? There's like 3 different sentences in there. I'm going to try to put them together real on the fly here. Will the new coach be thrown the coach-killing anchors? I have no idea what that's.
A little tricky to follow. I follow the first part, and I think I know where we're going with the third part, but I struggle with the
let's talk about the coach killers. And I think I mentioned a bit of that with, you're going to have to get Erik Karlsson's buy-in if he's on the team in the fall. I don't mean that as a criticism necessarily of Erik Karlsson in a fist-shaking, destructive sort of way, but I think it is a reality that here's a guy who wants nothing more than his shot at the Stanley Cup. And he came to Pittsburgh for that, and it hasn't worked. And he's realizing he's got a couple or a few years left, and that's all he wants. He's not an organization guy. He's a Stanley Cup guy. And you're going to have to maybe convince him that he has to play really, really well in order to facilitate that shot. He can't play like he did in January and February and March last year and get that shot.
I do not think in the interview process that can be a high priority discussion point with the next head coach of the Penguins. I think it needs to be a topic that gets brought up as part of the interview process, but I do not think it is a top 2 to 3 prerequisite requirement discussion point. I think it is a nice to have. I do not think it is a need to have.
I think that's part of the test, right? You've interviewed for multiple jobs and gotten a couple and all of that sort of fun stuff. Have you ever been given sort of those job interview tests where the owners or the general manager says, okay, in this situation, what would you do? Maybe that's the one of the questions for these coaches. All right, Erik Karlsson tells you the power play sucks and what you're doing is completely wrong. What do? Go.
I've had a couple of those, not too many that, I can remember. I've never interviewed with Kyle Dubas or anyone to that level. Full transparency and disclosure. I also think we have to remember too that this individual, whoever they are that gets selected, will be hiring a staff. Mike Vellucci's on the open market now. David Quinn is still under contract. We're not talking about him. I don't know if anyone's talking about him or if there's
no. I don't think so. And a reader had asked me about him last week, and I guess Dubas sort of mentioned he's a possibility. It just ended in such a mess in San Jose that it's too fresh. I think you have to sit on the sidelines or go back to assistant coaching or the AHL head coaching level before you vault back to being an NHL coach based on the way it ended in San Jose.
Yeah, and it was also, part of me thought too that he would join Mike Sullivan, with the Rangers. I kind of wondered. I suppose it still could happen. I think he is under contract with the Penguins. So, minimally this person's going to bring one or two coaches with them. And I think we also need to factor that in too. Great head coaches will find good assistants to fill their gaps, to address, team needs, areas that maybe they as a coach aren't strong in. And, perhaps the Karlsson factor becomes a play there.
I wonder if Mitch Love, how he would fill out his staff. Having only been in the NHL for a couple of years, he probably doesn't have the network or the Rolodex that even, a Jay Woodcroft or Elaine Nasreddine would have. He hasn't been around a lot of circles, and only been around the Capital circle in reality. So that I could see like Kyle Dubas saying, okay, you're going to be the coach.
Yeah.
Here's a list of 5 people, hire 3.
Yeah. I think if we fast forward ahead, Mitch Love's on the bench. If we're going to do this, let's do it.
Yeah. Why not?
To his right, an offensive guy, probably a guy he hires with Dubas and Spezza. That's my guess. And to his left, depending on what bench we're on, with the D, an experienced person.
Yeah.
That's my like, for example, I could see a David Quinn working with the Mitch Love, the mentor, gap filler role. Hey, Mitchie, I've been here before. I've made this mistake. Don't walk in the locker room right now. You're emotional. That's what a lot of first-time NHL head coaches need. They need that person to look both ways and cross the street before you do, so you don't get hit by the bus.
Well, that's what they call a bench coach in Major League or in baseball.
Exactly.
Somebody who tugs at at the back of your jersey when you're about to go out and rip first base off the line and carry it into the locker room or the clubhouse, rather.
Spencer Carberry in Washington has that, I think, from what I perceive and what I've read, with Kirk Muller.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kirk Muller, there's nothing in this game Kirk Muller hasn't seen. I think that if it's Love, if it's Nasreddine, certainly if it's Leach, you're going to see someone like that on the staff, I would think.
Vellucci, I'm just going to toss this out there and leave it. I think is criminally underrated as a coach. The guy's just been successful. People seem to like him, but maybe he got swallowed up in the Mike Sullivan vortex in Pittsburgh, where he had a job to do. He did his job and knew that he wasn't going to make any headway arguing one point or another with Sullivan, so he carried out the orders. I'd like to see him get a job somewhere else. He would also, I think, be an experienced guy who could tug at somebody and say, hey, be the guardrails for a first-year coach.
Yeah.
Anywho, but he won't be that in Pittsburgh.
Very, 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 very underrated. Just not a guy that attracts a lot of attention, but I agree with you. Good hockey man. Working with Team USA right now in the Worlds as an assistant to Ryan Warsofsky. who's a relative of Mike Sullivan. I always forget what the connection is there. Ryan Warsofsky is the San Jose coach, might be cousin, nephew. There's a tie to Mike Sullivan, and I'm sure Sully made a call to Ryan Warsofsky on Mike Vellucci. I could see, I don't think there's an opening in San Jose for an assistant, but you never know. I could see Mike Vellucci working with a coach like that.
Yeah, I forget the connection with Warsofsky. I think maybe they're just really tight family friends or something along those lines. But yeah, Brandon said Mitch Love has an episode of the coach's site or on the coach's site.
Yep.
The importance of stick on puck play.
Yep.
You've seen this
Brandon is bang on. This is one of the presentations that I referenced earlier of Mitch Love. He's very detailed. He's very articulate. He's not going to jump through the screen. He's also not going to put you to sleep. He's very on point. And players appreciate that. I especially think that the core players will appreciate that as well. He just strikes me as the type of guy that he delivers the information.
All right. Phoenix says, frankly, I don't have an opinion at this point. I'm too tainted. Between Hextall and Dubas, this team hasn't been in this bad of a shape in a long time. I don't know, Francis. I don't feel like the Penguins are in terrible shape. I feel like Dubas has done a decent enough job. Now, he's whiffed. He's had some big swings and misses. There's no question about that. You know, between Ryan Graves and Carlson is kind of in a gray area in the middle there. Some other players he probably would ask for a redo as well. But I also think he's done a nice job of putting some foundational bricks down. The Rutger McGroarty, the Ville Koivunen, and Sergei Murashov was a Hextall draft pick. So there's some young guys on the way. Tristan Brose was also a Ron Hextall pick in 2021.
Yeah.
Who quite frankly looked like he was going to not be a Penguins prospect until his senior year in Denver and all this, or junior year. And it just all clicked when they put him in the middle. So he's on the charge. I don't feel like the Penguins are in a bad shape. I mean, they're a long way from Stanley Cup contending, but there's at least some forward momentum now.
Yeah, the two blemishes for me are Carlson and Graves, and perhaps it's been a weakness of mine in my career coming up, albeit at much lower levels. I've just never valued Carlson-like players. I've always been okay with missing on those guys or passing on those guys. Call me a Bill Zito, Florida Panthers type of guy, but last I checked, they're trending towards doing it again.
But look, he went out and got Seth Jones, who was brilliant in Game 7.
Yeah, I mean, much different style of player, different size, as you know. I've tended to value those types of guys. I know what everyone's thinking. No kidding, who doesn't? But I have said no in the past to Carlson type players in favor, and perhaps I've gone too far the other way. So for me, Carlson and Graves, but I think a lot of this is on Ryan Graves. Like, he's got to make a decision here right now. God gave me the gift of size. God gave me the gift of reach. It's time for me to adapt and use it. The best thing for Ryan Graves is the lengthy summer to see kind of what he comes back at. If I'm sitting at training camp with you in a couple months, he's going to be one of the first guys I watch. The key for me with Kyle is all this draft capital that he has acquired. I think he's done a fantastic job of that. I don't think he uses all of it on picks. How does he take some of that draft capital and translate it to a 24, 25, 26-year-old player, similar to what Vancouver has done? Bring in more of those younger mid-range players to supplement here and supplement there.
Yeah, it's a rough year to do that because everybody has salary cap space now.
Good point.
A year ago, it was much easier, and maybe in a year from now, it'll be easier. But this offseason especially seems really difficult because teams can afford those mid-range guys who are ready for a second contract or a third contract, to go from $778,000 to 2 or 3 million,
Yep.
or 4 million even. And, that's not such a problem this year. That regular dude says the identity and DNA of the Penguins has typically been speed and skill. They've had tough guys as good complements, but typically those tough guys were quick skaters, can't deviate too far from speed. I suppose that's a good point. Although Dallas is decent enough skating. I don't think speed when I think Dallas. I think when Colorado was taking it to Dallas, it was their speed that was the big difference. But ultimately, Dallas found a way to, to shut them down, to out puck possess them, to out tough them, out deep them, sort of. I'm making up verbs, obviously, but I think it's, also another way. I'm curious because the Penguins aren't necessarily a fast team right now. You're having the Rutger McGroartys come up, and I like Owen Pickering skating enough, but he's not a burner. And you're going to have these guys, Jack St. Ivany and Harrison Brunick, who can get from A to B, but you're not going to say, wow, that guy's a great skater. I wonder if the Penguins don't have to maybe abandon the speed, or they have to add speed. There's going to have to be a decision there. Yay, nay? What's your take on it?
Dallas and Florida have a lot of players with a quality I like to call thrust. Hockey power.
Easy now. This is a hockey show, Francis.
Well, that's the term we use. So you're getting the hockey term here. All right, I'll just use the term power because it's also a term people probably understand, where they have power. You can see their players coming, you can hear their players coming, you can feel them coming. Matthew Tkachuk is one of the slowest players in the entire National Hockey League, if we're just going to break down skating speed.
But he never looks it, though, because he is such great anticipation.
Yep, smarts and a big hockey heart, heavy compete. So I think what you're going to start to see is the Penguins shaped a little bit more in that image. More of that I'll use the term power, more of that power image. Rutger McGroarty, who I know a bit, is never going to become a pretty skater. You don't want him to become a pretty skater. You want Rutger McGroarty to develop more power, more strength to his game, like a Matthew Tkachuk.
Burst, thrust. I don't mean to throw you off of the coaching jargon. I'm just, listen, you do an hour-long show, I'm going to slip in.
These things are bound to happen.
All right, let's go to Logan. Here's one of our last questions. It's hard to know what this team will be like with a new coach and fresh eyes and some young players allowed to make mistakes without being benched. We're going to kind of skip over the Mike Sullivan criticism there. I mean, the reality is the Penguins didn't have a lot of youth who didn't deserve to be benched over the last 10 years, quite frankly. Yeah. I just put an article up at 10:30 this morning about the Penguins' lack of draft picks from 2013 to 2024. They only had 4 first-round picks. One of those was Braden Yeager, who they flipped for Rutger McGroarty. So I guess maybe in this context, we can talk about McGroarty as a Penguins first-round pick. So to have 4 in 12 years or 12 drafts, you're not getting a whole lot of talent that has a pedigree that, Valtteri Puustinen, amazing work to come from 7th round draft pick, across the pond to even make the NHL. He maximized what God gave him. Unfortunately, he reached that ceiling and it wasn't really beneficial to the NHL team.
Right.
And I think people get so mad that he wasn't given more rope. But the reality is, coach, GM, anybody around would say, hey, he hit the ceiling. Good on him, but we need more in these sorts of situations. And I digress. I'm so happy not to have to deal with that Mike Sullivan stuff anymore. It is makes my heart happy to not do that.
It also takes on a bit of a life of its own too. And Listen, I think one of the best things happening in Pittsburgh over the next couple months from a Penguins hockey standpoint is the development camp. Like, I just would encourage everyone, because I don't know if I'll be on with you again. We'll see here before the end of the summer. Like, the development camp in July is just a tremendous opportunity to see the young players in action.
Well, last year was the first time I actually felt like it was important to be there and paying close attention to more than one guy. It used to be you showed up to watch Sam or maybe Sam Poulin and Nathan Legare, see how they progressed in the summer, and to see if there was any diamonds in the rough. There were a couple or a few here and there, but they were guys who would be good AHL players, not ones you really projected to make the NHL. Now, this year, you're talking a half a dozen guys who can play in the NHL in 25, 26 in that development camp. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think so. And Kirk McDonald, who you mentioned earlier, the head coach in Wilkes-Barre, is a very, very important person in the organization, along with Tom Kostopoulos, who I believe is still the director of player development, does a wonderful job, knows his stuff. This organization is building up some young players and I'm anxious to see what happens with the draft capital. That's what I'm going to be watching very carefully over these next few drafts. How many players actually get picked? What's the skill set of these players? And then how many of these picks are used for something else? Because there will be a bit of that going on, as you well know.
Well, sure. I think what Dubas has amassed thus far, or maybe, bricks in the foundation, but not necessarily yet. He doesn't yet have the cornerstones. And he's going to need, maybe he has to just be patient and hit on a couple of high draft picks. This is me. I think Roger McQueen in this year's draft could be one of those cornerstones if he's still there at 11. I'm maybe in the minority there. I think people are getting really high on Brady Martin and Jake O'Brien. But I also think other teams are getting high on those two guys as well. I don't foresee them being there at number 11 anymore. So he's going to have to find some high-end talent that you can rely on for the next 15 years down the middle.
Yeah.
That's the way you have to win. So that's my 2 cents on that. Let's see here. The star players are old. We need to understand that this is a full rebuild. It is, but it's also on the fly, too. If it were a full rebuild, Sidney Crosby is gone, Evgeny Malkin's gone, Chris Letang is gone, Erik Karlsson's gone, and they're dumped for what they can get, not necessarily holding on for hockey trades for a couple of them. They're just, they're gone if this is a full rebuild. So it's not quite, but I get the semantics, though, because Dubas hasn't really used a specific or a consistent term. I think revamp was his most recent sort of term.
Yeah, there's usually a couple. I like what Doug Armstrong in St. Louis called it. He called it a whatever. That's my favorite one. Whatever.
I think, if I could put that in print, like if people began to use it. All right, Chris loves Mitch Love. Okay, so people commenting on our stuff here. Let me see if there's any questions for you and I. Gable Fisk is always pretty good for a question. Here's a good one. Which candidate runs a system that would allow the offense to run through Karlsson and juice his point totals? What do you think, Francis? Could any of these coaches, sort of like David Quinn did in New York and San Jose, where Quinn featured Adam Fox and then Erik Karlsson, at least more so than other guys have. Also, those two teams got him fired. So I don't think any of those guys are really back end forward first guys.
I also am not sure, running it through Karlsson. Like, I don't know that anybody's really going to do that. I think of the five that we just walked through, the person that gives me the most confidence could get into a laboratory and come out with the formula is probably Woodcroft. I don't believe he's the best coach for the Penguins on that list, but I would say to you, like, if this was the assignment, from the person asking the question. If this was the mission, I would put Woodcroft, that he would be my top of the list candidate to do that. If the general manager said, I need you to spend the next year or part of the season, we need to run things through Carlson, I would say Woodcroft, but try selling that to the rest of the group, especially 87. Like that's not going to go well.
Yeah, if Carlson were 4 years younger, I think that's maybe a more serious discussion, but you don't construct around a soon-to-be 35-year-old defenseman.
Exactly. Yeah. Adam Fox with Carlson in Ottawa or post-San Jose trade, I get the comparison. But, Erik Karlsson still has a great skill set, could help a lot of teams, closer to the end than the beginning.
Yeah. All right. Let's see here. Koken likes Nasreddine, checks all the boxes, familiar with the organization. Is he really familiar with the organization? I mean, he knows where Wilkes-Barre is. He knows where Pittsburgh is. But I guess he would also know TK quite well from their wars together in Wilkes-Barre. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of carryover from Nasreddine's time in the organization. I mean, I guess he might know to go to the casino in Wilkes-Barre to get dinner rather than trying to go to that, Wendy's by the arena.
Yeah, I think I know which one you're talking about. He knows how to get from the Westin downtown to PPG Paints Arena. He might know the person that opens the door from training camps back in the day. That's why I said light familiarity. He'll talk about that in his press conference if he gets the head coaching position, that it's great to be back, the familiarity with the organization. But I think that is a little overrated. That's why I use the term in our little graphic we put up, light familiarity. There's light familiarity with the organization.
All right, let's. I don't want to keep you more than I've already kept you over an hour already. I could spend an afternoon like this. Is there a reason why Erik Karlsson doesn't work with other high-end right-handed defensemen? Didn't work with the Sharks and Brent Burns, and hasn't worked in Pittsburgh with Chris Letang. I don't know, Francis. I don't necessarily see a correlation there. Yeah. I see similarities between the teams, wherein the teams were on their way down, kind of around them. I don't necessarily think the relationship with Burns or Letang was a reason that Karlsson didn't succeed or hasn't yet succeeded.
It's very tricky to find a good long-term consistent partner for a defenseman like Erik Karlsson. You can't put him with someone who is defensively sound that can't boogie. Mm-hmm. The partner has to be able to boogie and get up the rink with him and be in good support position for him. At the same time, you can't play him with someone just like him. So you need someone with a defensive conscience who can also skate and be the yin to his yang in certain offensive situations. It's a real, and Dan, in many ways, I'm the worst guy to talk to about this because, as I said, I've had challenges with this type of defenseman in the past because I still think that defensemen have to play defense at times. And there's actually not enough of them coming up in the game today. Dan, I think I predict in the next 5 years, I think the 5-6 pair is coming back. I do. I think the 5-6 pair is coming back. It's no different than the clothes in our closets from 30 years ago. If you hold on to them, they'll come back and snap.
Explain that a little deeper. I know what you mean, but I think fans might say, well, every team uses a 5-6 pairing. What are you talking about?
Not as much anymore.
They're playing 12 and 13 minutes a lot of times now.
The Chicago Blackhawks, when they won the cup in 11, 12, 13, whenever that was.
Lord, they took years off of Seabrook and Keith's life, probably, with that run.
Yeah, and so where I'm going with this is we transition to sort of a top 5D, and then your 6th and your 7th were maybe not the best skaters, lunch pail, plumber, use whatever analogy you want. I think the 5-6 pair, two guys that, yes, they skate well, but they're not afraid to block shots, clear out the front of the net, kill penalties. I don't ever have to be on the power play. I'm happy playing a role. I think that pair is coming back. I think that pair is coming back in style. I think there was a period where we moved away from it a bit. We got enamored with Carlsons or slightly lesser versions of Carlsons. I think the 5-6 pair is coming back. Not the 5-6D, but the 5-6 pair, where you put them together as long as they skate. Because there's too many coaches that are afraid to lose their job because they don't have enough of these types of guys. There's too many GMs that can't get out of from one round to the next because they don't have enough of these types of guys. To me, the Florida Panthers blueprint has never been brilliant. It's been the blueprint all along for success. It really has been. Building from the net on out. That's Al Arbor. That's Lou Lamoriello. That's never going to change.
You know, it's funny you say that. I have had a fear because I don't want to watch this kind of hockey. I fear is coming, and that is this positionless hockey I hear talked about in the junior ranks and such, where you basically, it's almost Ivan Halinka-like from 25 years ago, where you put the same 5 players out on the ice and they all have to sort of defend and attack, and you might see a center playing defense as much as the defenseman, and the defenseman being as offensive as the center. I don't think that's a good way to go, but I also hear people and coaches in the game talking about the march of that positionless. And when you say there are very few defensive defensemen, there's a lack of them coming up through these systems, I'm like, oh no, it's because of this positionless hockey sort of thing.
I think that what I'm suggesting is I think that those types of D are going to start to be valued more just because of these. You need some of these types of guys to win a series, to win a round. And there's just too many examples out there right now.
Great balance, isn't it, though? If the NHL regular season were paramount, those guys would be much less important. But because the Stanley Cup playoffs are such a different beast, and I use beast with a capital F, you need those guys because you can't win in the playoffs without them. When the games just become wars of attrition and all those sorts of things, you need those guys. And the team's willing to sacrifice maybe a few wins or a couple pucks in the regular season for a couple of wins in the postseason, maybe keeps the balance in the NHL game.
Well, and you need to play a style throughout the season most nights. And you need to have a value system that gets created during the regular season that sets you up for the playoffs. The Florida Panthers were wicked entertaining when they had 100 million points under Andrew Brunette in the regular season. But the point is they weren't game ready come the playoffs. Enter Paul Maurice. They don't finish as high in the standings, but they're game ready come the playoffs. I think that is paramount too, is to be sure you're playing like the Toronto Maple Leafs this year did play a style of game, Dan, that readied them more for the playoffs. I'm not taking anything away from Sheldon Keefe. And Brad Treliving, who I think has done a fantastic job in Toronto of filling the gaps with additions like Carlo, Tanev. They played a style of game that readied them for the playoffs. And I think that the Penguins, whether they are dead last in the league next year or surprise everybody, need to get right to work, this next coach, of implementing that style of game so that when the talent is ready, they are systematically and structurally ready. We got to move both cars ahead on the trolley tracks at the same time.
All right, here's the last question. From Cal66, Francis, how much influence does a head coach have on a UFA signing compared to the team itself, the facilities? I guess what he's saying is how attractive is the head coach for the free agents, not how much input does a coach get on who to sign, but how much of a factor is that for where guys sign?
Damn, that's a great question. So I would like to say a lot. I think in reality, it's less than we think. I actually think that one of the biggest draws, it's the players that I'm going to be around if I sign there. I think that has a bigger effect than we think. I do think facilities matter. I think quality of life, if you have a family with youngsters, really matters. And I think Pittsburgh's at one of the top of the list there. But I think who the head coach is, I don't think that's nearly as big of a draw, just because they're cycled in and out every 2 to 3 years nowadays. I think 10 plus years ago, that was a factor. I think as each year passes, it's a little bit less and less.
Yeah, there are some guys who I think make a big difference, positive and negative. Brindamore would be a prime example in Carolina, where, Jake Gensel kind of signaled, he loved Carolina, but when push came to shove, he went elsewhere. Mikko Rantanen very quickly was like, no. But other guys understand what Carolina can bring to them and offer them in terms of community and quality of life. And
ownership is big.
True.
Big. How the players are treated, the team services department. What does the organization do or not do to go above and beyond? So I think it's more that the players I'm going to be around, and then of course where the team is at in their trajectory. That also has a lot to do with it.
I'll put a button on this. I won't say who was telling me about this, but there was some consternation, or there was some players groused a little bit because the Carolina Hurricanes weren't necessarily one of those great organizations with facilities and the little things like staying in the best hotel in town. They were sometimes staying in the, a couple steps down from the best. And that's, you think, good Lord, it wouldn't bother you or I. But the players every year seem to fight for a little increase in their meal money. Here are guys making a few $1 million, earning about 15 or $20 in their per diem. Just little things like that seem to me mean quite a bit.
Yeah, because in the players' eyes, it speaks to the commitment level and the seriousness of the organization. And I think Tampa's atop that list right now. I think Detroit's very close to the top of that list. Vegas is at the top of that list. And Pittsburgh at one point was right there. I'm not sure where the Penguins are now.
Very interesting. We will leave it there. Francis, always appreciate when you've got some time to spend with us. Thank you for the graphics. I'll run through them all one more time real quick.
Arts and crafts. Again, ready for today.
What did you make these in? DJ Smith, Mitch Love, Jay.
I may have had a little help.
You had some help?
May have had a little help, just a little.
All right. I won't ask. You won't tell. And we'll go from there. Thank you, Francis. Have fun.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
All right. That's Francis Angelo, and I'm Dan Kingerski. We'll make this available both on the on the website and via podcast form. Geez, we've done an hour and a half already. Let me see if there's any questions that I can dive into. Nope. That's it. Here's, Koken saying Brady Martin 11 would be a great get. And my feeling on Martin, I'm just going to maybe talk for a couple minutes here. My feeling on Martin is high floor, lower ceiling, whereas a guy like McQueen might have a much higher ceiling, but also a much lower floor. Logan wants to know what Sam Bennett's next contract looks like. I haven't even looked it up because it doesn't really involve the Penguins. It'll be a few million more than anybody expects because there will be so many people bidding for him. Also, if Florida is in the ballpark, he's going to stay there. No question about it. Okay, that is it. Kids, I enjoy you very much, and this was a lot of fun today. This I thought was a great chat with Francis. Maybe you, through the course of that chat, made up your minds or got closer to a candidate or opened your mind to a different one. I probably am a little bit different. My thinking, I would have put Elaine Nasruddin 1 and DJ Smith 1. Now I probably am leaning towards Love and then those two guys. All right, have fun. Click on Pittsburgh Hockey Now. Also, if you jumped on the website. There was my tip jar. If you enjoy these chats, go ahead and put a little spare change in the can. I always appreciate you. Thanks very much. And we will do this again next Wednesday, 1 p.m. Have fun.